Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 17th of June of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where the Russian summer offensive is gaining momentum. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly, especially around the Slaviansk-Konstantinivka agglomeration. So let's discuss this in details because we see that the battle for the Slaviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration is entering its decisive phase. And as we discussed during the previous days, during the previous videos, the Russians began their offensive operation between the cities of Dobropillia and Hruzke. And these days, lots of changes on the ground were recorded. For example, if you remember, yesterday the Russians stated that as a result of clashes, the Russians established complete control over the settlement of Novyi Donbas. Based on the report that was published yesterday by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we adjusted the map. And today, the Russians unexpectedly reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians improved their positions even further in the northern direction, and the Russians captured the settlement by the name of Stepy. Based on this report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we made additional adjustment. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 15th, this is the end of the 16th, and this is the end of the 17th of June of 2026. And now the Russians are just 3 kilometers before the road of TO514 that connects the city of Dobropillia with the settlement of Kramatorsk. Furthermore, we recorded an anomaly activity of the Russian artillery forces in this triangle. So these are the changes. No, these are the icons from this area between the 14th and between the 15th and the 17th of June of 2026. As you can see, the Russians are bombing and attacking the settlement of Hruzke Vesele significantly. So these are the videos, these are the videos that were published by pro-Russian sources these days. In this video, we can see how the Russians were attacking the settlement of Hruzke with aviation, with artillery. It seems that the Russians are trying to soften defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine. Today, we received another video from the settlement of Hruzke, and here we can see how the armed forces of the Russian Federation were attacking the settlement using the multiple launch rocket systems, and these are obviously not just a regular attack. This is something like an artillery preparation. And summarizing everything, we believe and we expect that in coming days, in coming hours, the Russians will carry out another offensive operation from the settlements of Tarskoye in the direction of the villages of Kucherov Yar and Hruzke. So the Russians, as we can see, are moving using broad frontline attack, and as we discussed during the previous videos, the Russians, during the first stage of this offensive operation, of this major offensive operation, are tasked to break through Ukraine's defenses between the cities of Dobropillia and Hruzke and Kramatorsk, and most likely after the Russians finish this stage of offensive operation, they will continue offensive further in the northern direction with the purpose to cut TO514 road. And if this happens, this is going to be basically the beginning of the end for the Slaviansk-Konstantinivka agglomeration, because from these positions the Russians would be able not just to cut the main logistics. From these positions and from this configuration, we see that the Russians enter the operational space, and from these positions the Russians would be able both to attack the city of Kramatorsk and Slaviansk from behind. This is the first thing. And the second thing, the Russians would be able to establish complete FPV drone control over the territory to the south of the settlement of Maidan in the direction of this breakthrough pocket. And of course, we understand that this is not a full picture, this is not the final configuration, obviously, and we know and we see that these days the Russians also try to advance through the Slaviansk direction, and the Russians, it seems, are going to move in the same direction towards the villages of Maidan Previlia with the purpose to establish complete and total encirclement of the Ukrainians through the territory of the Slaviansk-Kramatorsk Konstantinivka agglomeration. Now let's discuss the situation in the area of the city of Lyman. As you can see, the map has been adjusted significantly. This is the situation by the end of the 14th of June of 2026. This is the end of the 15th of June of 2026. This is the end of the 16th, and this is the end of the 17th of June of 2026. As you can see, according to these updates, the Russians during the previous 72 hours have improved their position significantly. Basically, according to all these videos, the Russians control more than even 80% of the settlement. But telling the truth, I believe that the settlement of Slaviansk was already captured by Russians. The thing is that the Russians are showing us these videos they're showing us archived videos probably of late May or early June of 2026. Most likely the Russians managed to move even further in the direction of the river Seversky Donetsk, but they don't publish updates on this matter because they want to keep this information in silent. They want to keep this information in secret, and they don't want to reveal the current positions. I believe that currently the clashes are taking place already for the river of Seversky Donetsk, which means that the Slaviansk-Kramatorsk Konstantinivka agglomeration is about to fall into a cauldron without any chances for evacuation. So from these positions we see that the Russians continue, and probably the Russians are finishing the battle for the territory to the north and to the east of the Seversky Donetsk river. The Russians are about to establish complete control over these territories and to recapture the positions they lost during the Kharkiv counter-offensive operation of 2022. And when it happens, when all these territories are taken by Russians, most likely we should expect probably additional offensive operation from the Russian side, and most likely the Russians would try to cross the river of Seversky Donetsk. Most likely this is going to be the area of responsibilities of the group of forces west. The Russians are not going to move in the direction of the City of Slaviansk. The most important thing the Russians are going to do to cross the river and to take villages along the river like Mayaki. Especially the Russians would try to establish complete control over this forest around the settlement of Mazanovka, and over this forest between the villages of Bogorodichna, Dolina, Studionak, and Yeremovka. So this is the task of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, of the group of forces west, for upcoming months or something like this. And we see that if it happens, if the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, are able to establish complete control over these territories, then the distance between these edge positions of Russians and the territory to this territory that is already that also the Russians are tasked to establish control from the south will be around 20 kilometers, and this is going to be an encirclement. This is not going to be a cauldron. This is going to be just something like an operational encirclement of the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine between the cities of Slaviansk and Drushkovka. But the Russians will establish a kill zone in this area. The Russians would use probably hundreds or even thousands of drones through this territory with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to bring additional reinforcements and reserves in the direction of the Slaviansk-Drushkovka agglomeration. And if the Russians are able to create this configuration, obviously the Ukrainians would start suffering huge losses, very huge losses, and this could be something like the biggest defeat since the beginning of the special military operation. As of now, let's wait and see what is going to happen next, but three things are happening right now. The Russians are breaking through to the east of Dobropillia in the northern direction. We have proofs about this. The Russians are finishing the battle for the city of Lyman, and the Russians continue moving in the southwestern direction, and the Ukrainians are not able to show any resistance. And the Russians are finishing the battle for the city of Konstantinivka during the previous 24 hours. Another video was published by pro-Russian sources where we can see more flexed raids through the city. We see no resistance from the Ukrainian side. More and more soldiers are entering the settlement of Konstantinivka, and the Russians continue advancing. Currently, the Ukrainians control just the most northern parts of the settlement, but it's just probably a matter of time, and the days of these territories are numbered. There are very heavy clashes. The Russians are sending more and more troops in this direction with the purpose to take these territories under complete control. And of course, don't forget that the Russians will try to encircle the Slaviansk-Konstantinivka direction, not just through these two pincers. Most likely and 100% sure the Russians will continue advancing from the east in the western direction with the purpose to get as close as possible the Slaviansk-Drushkovka agglomeration from the east. As of the previous 24 hours, we received the report that the Russians secured the settlement of Kriva Luka, and this video was published by pro-Russian sources. And here we can see how the clashes for the settlement of small Piskunivka was taking taking place as a result of clashes. More flags were raised through these territories. The Russians are preparing themselves right now to begin an assault operation towards the settlement of Mykolaipillia. The Russians have already begun bombing and attacking this territory with aviation, with bombs, trying to reduce the defenses of the armed force Ukraine in this area till ruins, trying to soften the defenses. And of course, don't forget that these days the Russians are trying to improve their positions on the Ukrainian side of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbas Canal. So the Russians are attacking right now the Slaviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration from dozens of directions, and the most important thing that the Russians improve their positions through every single direction they chose for offensive operations. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dnipropetrovsk direction. There are very heavy clashes in this area. The Russians, it seems, managed to break through Ukraine's defense to the southwest of the settlement of Dobropillia. Today we received a report that in the Dubovnikov territorial community of Dnipropetrovsk region, a mandatory evacuation of children and their parents has been declared. So we are talking about this territory. The Ukrainians are going to evacuate these territories. Furthermore, I would like to remind you, if we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of June of 2026, you'll see that several weeks ago the Ukrainians announced the evacuation of Vasilivka. Probably it happened in May. Let's take a look at May. We will understand it better. So the Ukrainians announced the evacuation of Vasilivka, not of Vasilivka, but of Novomykolaipillia, Novoalexandrovka area. So this territory was also evacuated by the Ukrainians. The territory around the settlement of Chaplina were evacuated. So summarizing everything about the evacuation since the beginning of May of 2026, according to different sources, according to different updates, the Ukrainians have already evacuated all these villages and all these territories inside of these two black areas. So there are no civilians in these territories. The Ukrainians have completely evacuated all these territories, and obviously the Ukrainians deployed troops in this direction with the purpose to hold the Dnipro defenses, and which means that the Ukrainians understand, the Ukrainians realize that the Dnipro offensive operation and the Zaporozhye offensive operation is going to be a major and primary offensive operation for the Russians for the 2026 and probably 2027s. The situation is very difficult, as we can see, and as of now the Ukrainians are trying just to stabilize the situation and to win weeks, days, months before they are able to establish strong defenses through this territory. But as we discussed just a minute ago, it seems that the Russians managed to break through Ukraine's defense to the west of the settlement of Novopavlivka, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. The Russians, the Novopavlivka flower is blooming, as we can see. The Russians right now, according to different sources, entered two villages, two settlements, the settlement of Kolona Mizhova and Raipol, and the Russians managed to dig in deeper, and the Russians began outflanking the settlement of Sergeyevka from the southwest. If the settlement of Sergeyevka falls and the Russians are trying to outflank the village both from the south and from the north, the Russians obviously will enter an operational space, the operational space along the M30 road, and then the Russians will continue advancing further. So something very strange, something very interesting might happen through the Dnipro direction in coming days, in coming hours. Let's wait and see, of course, what is going to happen next. Furthermore, don't forget that the Russians bomb and attack these territory with drones and missiles almost every single day. As of the previous 24 hours, for example, the Russians destroyed another gas station in this area, and this video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources. So, as we discussed during the previous videos, for example, today several pro-Ukrainian sources reported that for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, every single gas station through the Sumy region was destroyed. So today the Russians for the first time destroyed every single gas stations through the Sumy region. So there are no more gas stations in this area. Maybe there are several, but they don't play significant role when talking about supply and support of the Ukrainian contingent in this area. For example, today the gas station was destroyed through the settlement of Trastinets. And these pictures and these videos were published from this area. So as you can see, this is a gas station. The gas station was completely destroyed. The Ukrainians used to use this gas station to supply their contingent along the line of combat contact. And now, from now on, they don't have this possibility anymore. And the Russians most likely will continue this process. They will continue destroying gas stations along the line of combat contact with the purpose to not allow the armed forces of Ukraine to have fuel, to have gasoline, and to have everything they need with the purpose to maneuver, to use vehicles, and the most important, to use the mid-range or long-range drones to attack deep inside of the theater of Russia. Now let's discuss the situation through the northern directions. Probably the most important update is the Russian offensives through the settlements of Kazachi Lopan and Zolochiv. These days, lots of changes on the ground were recorded. It seems that the Russians currently control around 15% of the settlement of Kazachi Lopan, and the Russians continue advancing. Furthermore, we start receiving updates that the Russians began using artillery and aviation through these territories to attack temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine and FPV drone operators. So the Russians, it seems, are launching their major Kharkiv offensive operation from this area, and it seems that the Russians are going to only intensify their attacks. The task of Russians through this area is to establish complete control over the settlement of Zolochiv. If it happens, then the distance between the city of Zolochiv and the Kharkiv itself would be less than 30 kilometers. The Russians would be able to start using artillery. The Russians would be able to force the Ukrainians to move their launching sites deep inside of the theater of Ukraine, and this will allow the Russians to improve their position through the entire northern direction. So the situation remains tense as we can see. As for the previous 24 hours, probably the Kupiansk direction is the only area where we haven't received anything about additional progress on the ground, but probably there is some progress, but we will receive updates on this matter during the next several days. As for the massive attacks, during the previous 12 hours, the Ukrainians attacked deep inside of the theater of Russia. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation stated that between the 16th and the 17th of June of 2026, the Russians destroyed around 400 drones of the armed forces of Ukraine, but as of the 17th of June of 2026, we haven't received anything on the matter of whether the Ukrainians managed to deal damage to Russian facilities or not. And another important update today took place on the border between the Republic of Belarus, the Russian Federation, and Ukraine. Today we received the report that the bus left the city of Gomel on the theater of the Republic of Belarus, and this bus was moving in the direction of Moscow or in the direction of the city of Bryansk. And later we start receiving report that an FPV drone attacked this bus, and as a result of attack, according to information we have, there are casualties among civilians. So this is a very important situation. The investigation committee of the Republic of Belarus and the Russian Federation have recognized this attack as a terrorist attack, and now it's clear that most likely we'll see a response from the Belarusian side. This is a very important situation because this attack probably tried to achieve just one goal: to force the Belarusians to be involved into the conflict with the Ukrainians, and it seems that right now we are witnessing actions in this direction. Very interesting to see how exactly the Republic of Belarus is going to respond to this attack, because obviously we understand that the Ukrainians will not give the Belarusians operators of FPV drones that were attacking this bus that was moving in the direction of the theater of Russia from the territory of the Republic of Belarus. So this is the situation in this area. We see that the conflict escalates, and the geography of the conflict may be increased in coming days or weeks. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.